Breaking Dawn by Stephanie Meyer. Chapter 9. Not a lie. The story Charlie told Billy was not a story. Where I stared, eyes bulging, her skin turned a light green. The blonde, bronze bloodsucker, the shoyu Rosalie, bent over her, cutting into my view, hovering in a strange protective way. This was wrong. I knew how Bella felt about almost everything. Her thoughts were so obvious. Sometimes it was like they were printed on her forehead. So she didn't have to tell me every detail of the situation for me to get it. I knew that Bella didn't like Rosalie. I seen it in the set of her lips when she talked about her. Not that she didn't like her. She was afraid of Rosalie, or she had been. There was no fear as Bella glanced up at her now. Her expression was apologetic or something. Then Rosalie snatched the basin from the floor and held it under Bella's chin, just in time for Bella to throw it up noisily into it. Edward fell to his knees by Bella's side, his eyes all tortured looking, and Rosalie held out her hand, warning him to keep back. None of it made sense. When she could raise her head, Bella smiled weakly at me, sort of embarrassed. "Sorry about that," she whispered to me. Edward moaned real quiet. His head slumped against Bella's knees. She put one of her hands against his cheek, like she was comforting him. I didn't realise my legs had carried me forward until Rosalie hissed at me, suddenly appearing between me and the couch. She was like a person on the TV screen. I didn't care she was there. She didn't seem real. "Rose, don't," Bella whispered. "It's fine." "It's fine." Blondie moved out of my way, though I could tell she hated to do it. Scowling at me, she crouched by Bella's head, tense to spring. She was easier to ignore than I would ever have dreamed. "Bella, what's wrong?" I whispered. Without thinking about it, I found myself on my knees too, leaning over the back of the couch across from her husband. He didn't seem to notice me, and I barely glanced at him. I reached out for her free hand, taking it in both of mine. Her skin was icy. "Are you all right?" It was a stupid question. She didn't answer it. I'm so glad you came to see me today, Jacob," she said. Even though I knew Edward couldn't hear her thoughts, he seemed to have heard some meaning I didn't. He moaned again, into the blanket that covered her, and she stroked his cheek. "What is it, Bella?" I insisted, wrapping my hands tight around her cold, fragile fingers. Instead of answering, she glanced around the room like she was searching for something, with a plea and a warning in her look. 6 pairs of anxious yellow eyes stared back at her. Finally, she turned to Rosalie. "Help me up, Rose," she asked. Rosalie's lip pulled back over her teeth, and she glared up at me, like she wanted to rip my throat out. I was sure that was exactly the case. "Please, Rose." The blonde made a face, but she leaned over her, next to Edward, who didn't move an inch. She put her arm carefully behind Bella's shoulders. "No," I whispered. "Don't get up." She looked so weak. "I'm answering her question," she snapped, sounding a little bit more like the way she usually talked to me. Rosalie pulled Bella off the couch. Edward stayed where he was, sagging forward until his face was buried in the cushions. The blanket fell to the ground at Bella's feet. Bella's body was swollen, her torso ballooning out in a strange, sick way. It strained against the faded grey sweatshirt that was way too big for her shoulders and arms. The rest of her seemed thinner, like the bulge had grown out of what it sucked from her. It took me a second to realise what the deformed part was. I didn't understand until she folded her hands tenderly around her bloated stomach, one above and one below, like she was cradling it. I saw it then. I still couldn't believe it. I'd just seen her a month ago. There was no way she could be pregnant. Not that pregnant. Except that she was. I didn't want to see this. I don't want to think about this. I don't want to imagine him inside her. I don't want to know that something I hated so much had taken root in the body I loved. My stomach heaved, and I had to swallow back vomit. But it was worse than that. So much worse. Her distorted body, the bones jabbing against the skin of her face. I can only guess that she looked like this, so pregnant, so sick, because whatever was inside her was taking her life to feed its own. Because it was a monster, just like its father. I always knew he would kill her. His head snapped up as he heard the words inside mine. 1 second we were both on our knees, and then he was on his feet, towering over me. His eyes were flat black, the circles underneath them dark purple. "Outside, Jacob," he snarled. I was on my feet too, looking down on him now. This is why I was here. "Let's do this," I agreed. The big one, Emmett, pushed forward onto Edward's other side of the hungry-looking one. Jasper was right behind him. I didn't really care. Maybe my pack would clean up the scraps when they finished me off. Maybe not. It didn't matter. Even for the tiniest part of a second, my eyes touched on the two standing in the back. Esme, Alice, swollen, distractingly feminine. When I was sure the others were coming before I had to do anything about them, I didn't want to kill girls. Even vampire girls. Though I might make an exception for that blonde. "No," Bella gasped, and she stumbled forward out of balance to clutch at Edward's arm. Rosalie moved with her, like there was a chain locking them to each other. "I need to talk to him, Bella," Edward said in a low voice, talking only to her. He reached up to touch her face, to stroke it. This made the room turn red, made me see fire. After all he'd done to her, he was still allowed to touch her that way. Don't strain yourself, he went on, pleading. Please rest. We'll both be back in just a few minutes. She stared at his face, reading it carefully. Then she nodded and drooped back towards the couch. Rosalie helped her lower her back onto the cushions. Bella stared at me, trying to hold my eyes. Behave, she insisted. Then come back. I didn't answer. I wasn't making any promises today. I looked away and then followed Edward out the front door. A random, distorted voice in my head noted that the separating him from the coven hadn't been so difficult, had it? He kept walking, never checking to see if I was about to spring on his unprotected back. I suppose he didn't need to check. He'd know when I decided to attack, which meant I'd have to make that decision very quickly. I'm not ready for you to kill me yet, Jacob Black, he whispered as he paced quickly over the house. You have to have a little patience. Like he cared about his schedule, I growled under my breath. Patience isn't my specialty. He kept walking, maybe a couple of 100 yards down the drive away from the house, with me right on his heels. I was all hot, my fingers trembling, on the edge, ready and waiting. He stopped without warning and pivoted to face me. His expression froze me again. For a second I was just a kid who had lived all of his life in the same tiny town, just a child. Because I knew that I would have to live a lot more, suffer a lot more, to even understand the searing agony in Edward's eyes. He raised his hands as if to wipe sweat from his forehead, but his fingers scraped against his face like they were going to rip his granite skin right off. His black eyes burned in their sockets, out of focus, or seeing things that weren't there. His mouth opened like he was going to scream, but nothing came out. This was the face the man would have had if he was burning at the stake. For a moment I couldn't speak. It was too real. The face. I'd seen a shadow of it in the house, seen it in her eyes and his. But this made it final. The last nail in her coffin. It's killing her, right? She's dying. And I knew when I said it my face was a watered-down echo of his. Weaker, different, glassed in shock. I hadn't wrapped my head around it yet, but it was happening too fast. He'd had time to get to this point, and it was different because I'd already lost her so many times, in so many ways, in my head, and different because she's never really mine to lose. And different because this wasn't my fault. My fault, Edward whispered, and his knees gave out. He crumpled in front of me, vulnerable, the easiest target you could imagine. But I felt cold as snow now. There was no fire in me. Yes, he groaned into the dirt, like he was confessing to the ground. Yes, it's killing her. His broken helplessness irritated me. I wanted to fight now, not an execution. Where was his smug superiority now? So why hasn't Carl done anything? I growled. He's a doctor, right? Get it out of her. He looked up and answered me in a tired voice. I had to explain this to the kindergartner for the 10th time. She won't let us. It took a minute for the words to sink in. Gee, she was running true to form. Of course, die for the monster spawn. It was so Bella. You know her well, he whispered. How quickly you see. I didn't see. Not in time. She wouldn't talk to me on the way home, not really. I thought she was frightened, that this would be natural. I thought that she was angry with me for putting her through this, for endangering her life, again. I never imagined what she was really thinking, what she was resolving. Not to my family met us at the airport, she ran right into Rosalie's arms. Rosalie's. And then I heard what Rosalie was thinking. I didn't understand until I heard that. Yet you understood after 1 second. He half sighed, half groaned. Just back up a second. She won't let you. The sarcasm was acid on my tongue. Do you ever notice that she's not exactly as strong as 110-pound human girl? How stupid are you, Vamps? Hold her down and knock her out with drugs. I wanted to, he whispered. Carlisle would have. What, too noble, were they? No, not noble. Her bodyguard complicated things. Oh, his story hadn't made much sense before, but it fit together now. So that's what Blondie was up to. What was in it for her, though? Did the Beauty Queen want Bella to die so bad? Maybe, he said. Rosie doesn't look at it quite that way.